Me tonight. I am so excited to already have had some discussions with everyone who is collecting and is a big Nancy Drew fan. I also started reading and collecting when I was 8, and about 15 years ago, I attended a Nancy Drew convention that is sponsored by the Nancy Drew Sleuths Group. And I learned some things about the books that I, grew up loving. And I thought, what, this would be really fun to share with my local library. So I put a version of this presentation that you're about to see together, and I've been adding to it and giving it to community groups and libraries for the last 15 years. And I'm excited to share it with you tonight. And before I start, can everybody see my screen?
Yes, you're good to go.
Okay. Let me just get it into slide mode here. There we go. So we are going to talk about Nancy Drew, the history behind the mystery, the 91st anniversary edition of Nancy Drew. So for over 91 years, generations of readers have been enjoying Nancy Drew mystery stories. And if you've ever read a Nancy Drew story, this should sound pretty familiar. This is Rinkworks' Book a Minute at Bedtime. And this is their version of the Nancy Drew series. Someone says, "Nancy Drew, help me with this mystery." Nancy Drew says, "Okay, friends, let's talk about the mystery and eat food." Hannah Gruen says, "Nancy Drew, be careful. Here, have a new car and an all expenses paid exotic vacation." Nancy says, "Look, that guy I saw being rude before seems to be involved in this mystery." Nancy Drew and her friends eat. They find a clue. They eat. Nancy Drew gets captured, but she escapes with information that solves the mystery. Someone says, "Thank you, Nancy Drew. Have a reward." She says, "No thanks." The end. Nancy Drew is a popular sleuth around the world and a beloved character. But what do you know about her? What is the history behind our favorite female detective? Who created Nancy Drew? Who is the author, Carolyn Keane? How has Nancy changed over the years, and what can we learn from her? So let's solve this mystery like Nancy Drew. Wave goodbye to Carson Drew, Hannah Gruen, and Togo as you travel to a different state or country. Be thankful for having chums on this call. You can grab a snack because we never sleuth on an empty stomach. Put on your thinking caps, hop into your convertible, and let's start looking for clues. Now, as Kelly said, we are going to have some trivia throughout, and I'll point out when those times come, and Kelly's going to help as well. But I do have just a few questions for you to think about as we go through. So who created Nancy Drew? Was Nancy Drew created by a man or a woman? Nancy Drew was created by a man named Edward Stradamire in 1929. Move this over a little bit. In 1905, he founded a syndicate of writers called the Stratamire Syndicate that produced many different series. And someone mentioned this earlier on the call. So the syndicate also produced the Bobbsey twins, Tom Swift, and the Hardy Boys. And if you're interested in more about Edward Strattomire, there's a great website called stratomire.org. The webmaster is James Keane. Now, Edward Strademire took advantage of a time when child labor laws and interest in childhood education gave children more free time and they started reading. And it was also about this time that it was less expensive for him to produce quality bound books. And he did that through Grosset and Dunlap. Now, he saw young girls were reading Hardy Boys, so he knew that they were ready for their own heroine. And he wanted this new series for girls to be less about niceties and more about being brave and adventurous. He wanted this character to be independent and spirited, have pluck and good sense. And that was a reflection of some changes in the culture. So what's happening in the 1920s? We have the Roaring Twenties. We have flappers rebelling against the Victorian rules about acceptable behavior for young women. We have women's suffrage. And the other thing that was happening at this time was prohibition. And that made crime stories very interesting to people. And it's in that time period that Nancy Drew debuts. The first 3 books in the series, written by Carolyn Keane, all debuted on April 28, 1930. The Secret of the Old Clock, The Hidden Staircase, and The Bungalow Mystery. So this was called a breeder set. So all 3 books were debuted on the same day. Now, sadly, Edward Stradamire died 2 weeks after the books debuted, so he never saw the success that Nancy Drew and some of his other series books became. After he passed away, his daughters took over the syndicate. All right, we are ready for our first trivia question. So Nancy Drew was not always going to be named Nancy Drew. What was one of the names being considered for this new character? Was it Betty Braveheart, Diana Dare, or Tess True? And Kelly, I will let you end the polling when you think it's good to go.
All right, we're at about 70% here. I'm going to give you another 5 seconds. All right, here we go.
Oh, so go ahead, Kelly.
Yep, there's our results. Looks like Tess True came in 42%. What do we
All right.
right?
Let's see if that's right.
Yep, go right ahead. I don't have answers on here. You have to tell us.
Okay. All right, are we ready? Diana Dare. So some of the other names being considered were Helen Hale, Stella Strong, and no pun intended, that was the strongest candidate. Edward Stratmire's original title was The Stella Strong Stories, and I am so thankful that was not selected. When Grosset and Dunlap agreed to publish the series, they did not like Stella Strong either. Nan Drew was on the list, and so they took that and changed it to Nancy Drew. All right, so this is another one just for you to think about. True or false? Carolyn Keane is a real person. That is false. Carolyn Keane is not or never was a real person. Carolyn Keane is a pseudonym or the name of a ghostwriter. Now, Edward Stratmire had so many ideas for books that he couldn't write them all himself. So he used ghostwriters to quickly produce the books and to provide some continuity for the readers. What he did was he would provide the outlines to the writers and the basic idea, and then the ghostwriter completed the book. They were paid a flat rate per book. They did not receive any royalties, and they could never reveal their names, and their name was not printed in the published volume. Now, a pen name or a pseudonym is not a new concept. Who knows this author? You may know him as Mark Twain, but that was his pen name. His real name is Samuel Longhorn Clemens. So the Syndicate used ghostwriters for all of their series books, the Bobbsey Twins, Dana Girls, Hardy Boys, and Tom Swift, and these are the pseudonyms. So you'll see Carolyn Keane also wrote the Dana Girls. So my chums, we are now on the case of the mysterious ghostwriter. Let's find out who Carolyn Keane really is. Now, young girls started writing to the Syndicate. They're writing letters to Carolyn Keane. And the person who answered these letters, she was a real person. Her name was Edith Blake. She was a secretary at the Syndicate. And so she wrote back to some young fans and says in 1956 that Miss Keane was born in the Midwest and that she's a seasoned traveler. In this next letter, Edith Blake actually admits that Carolyn Keane is a pen name. That's not her real name, that she was born in and still lives in the United States, just outside of New York City, and that her first book was published in 1930. And then this final letter in 1972, there's not a lot of personal details, just more about some of the next books that are coming out. But we actually now have a picture of Carolyn Keane with an autograph. Now, during this time, a man by the name of Frank Palooka was a librarian, and he was in charge of the Iowa Authors Collection Project. And his goal was to identify works by authors native to the state of Iowa or who graduated from the University of Iowa. So he got a list together for Mildred Wirt Benson, a University of Iowa alumna, with a list of children's books because he knew that she wrote children's books. And he put some Nancy Drew books on the list. And she responded to him and said that her reply was for informational purposes only, not to be used as a published statement. Skipping ahead to 1979, it's time for a change for the syndicate. Children are now watching TV more, playing video games, they're not reading. So Harriet Strattomire Adams is not making a lot of money. Grosset and Dunlap would not increase the royalties for the books, so she changed publishers to Simon & Schuster. She didn't want to leave Grosset and Dunlap. They had been with her since her father passed away during the Depression. She was a woman running a business in 1930, but the syndicate was losing too much money. Grosset and Dunlap then sues Simon & Schuster, and in 1980, a trial begins. Now, there's lots of things going on in this trial, but when we're looking for clues, what we care about is ownership of the Nancy Drew stories and who is Carolyn Keane. So 2 witnesses are called in. Harriet Strattomire Adams, which we would expect, and Mildred Wirt Benson. Well, there's Carolyn Keane right there. We had a picture of her. But what did Mildred Wirt Benson know? Time for poll question number 2. Who was Carolyn Keane for the original series, the first 1 to 56 books?
People are pretty confident in this one. The votes are coming in.
Yeah. Usually a safe bet, you know.
All right, about 5 more seconds, everyone. All right, here's our results.
All right, we got a lot of smart people in this audience tonight. You are correct. All of the above. Walter Carrig, we won't talk about him too much. He only wrote 3 volumes, but he is sometimes credited with writing more. He broke his contract and told the Library of Congress that he wrote the books. And so when they cataloged those, they gave him credit for writing the first 14 volumes. Now, Mildred Wirt Benson is most often credited with being the real Carolyn Keane or the original Carolyn Keane. She was already writing other books for the syndicate, and Edward Strademire wanted her to be the person to write the Nancy Drew series. He had her in mind. She really gave Nancy her personality and brought her to life in the books. She gave her a sense of adventure, independence, kind of a fierceness to her. And she wrote the 23 of the original series. Now, Mildred Wirt Benson was a tomboy. She didn't like dolls, and she liked to read adventure stories like Horatio Alger. And she always wanted to be a writer. She actually had her first story published in St. Nicholas magazine when she was 14. And authors like Mark Twain and Louisa May Alcott were published in that magazine as well. She was the first person, man or woman, to receive a master's degree from the Iowa School of Journalism in the summer of 1927. And she was very athletic and played a lot of sports. Sounds like someone we know who always wins golf tournaments and things like that in the books. She was very adventurous. She began flying lessons when she was 59 and received her pilot's license. And she was a journalist with the Toledo Blade for 58 years. And that connection to Toledo was something that Toledo was very proud of. I mentioned the Nancy Drew Sleuths group before, and I attended this smaller convention, but we went to the Toledo Lucas Public Library because the library was named a literary landmark in honor of Benson. Just like buildings have a historical landmark, the library has a literary landmark. And here's a picture of the plaque for the dedication. And if you're ever in the Toledo area, and if you like libraries at all, I have to say, and I go to libraries on any vacation I go to, I find the library. I love to go to libraries. This is one of the most beautiful libraries I've ever seen. It's Art Deco, it's amazing. Their children's room is incredible. And this is one of the end caps in their children's room as they celebrate Nancy Drew. They also have an original painting by Russell Tandy. These are very rare because his studio burnt down. So original paintings by him are rare. He was the original illustrator for the series. Now we move on to Harriet Strattamire Adams. She graduated from Wellesley in 1914, and she received job offers to teach and be a journalist. Now, oddly enough, her dad's doing this new series for girls being independent, and her parents believed in education, but they would not let her work outside the home. So they compromised, and she edited manuscripts and galley proofs from her parents' home. Little, not too much later, she was running an entire publishing business by herself, practically. Oops. Now, even though the Syndicate produced many series that we've talked about, Harriet had a very special interest in the Nancy Drew series. She was very involved in editing the outlines and writing manuscripts all the way through into the 80s, even after the original series. Harriet Strattomire Adams passed away in 1982. She never retired. She ran the Syndicate until she passed away. And in 1984, the Syndicate was sold to Simon & Schuster. So how has Nancy Drew changed since she came onto the scene in 1930? Well, in 1959, Grosset and Dunlap revised all of its juvenile material. The first 35 Nancy Drew books were revised and reissued. All right, it's time for our next trivia question. What was revised about Nancy? This one's a little trickier.
There's an obvious answer here. All right, we're about 70% turnout. We'll do another 5 seconds. All right, here's what we got.
Okay, so A and B, her age and what kind of car she drove was the #1 answer. I feel like we're on Family Feud. And you are correct. Her age and what kind of car she drove. Where she lived, River Heights, who knows where that is? It's, it's like Springfield and The Simpsons. That will never change. But her age had to change from 16 to 18, or she wouldn't be able to drive in all of the states. Then her car changed from a roadster to a convertible, because in 1959, there were not a lot of roadsters on the road. And someone mentioned this early in the presentation. The other thing that changed were completely different plots. So if you find the original text, or OT as collectors will call it, they will have a different plot than the revised text, or RT. And so one example, The Message in the Hollow Oak, the original plot is that Nancy wins land in Canada in a radio contest. Again, not something happening too often in 1959. So that was revised. But for all of the other books, they just took the same plot, they shortened it, simplified the vocabulary, and then modernized the elements. The next change was the number of chapters. So the books changed from 25 to 20 chapters. And this was simply just to save money. There were less pages to print. I attended a talk by Jennifer Fisher, and she revealed that the books were not revised in numerical order. It was done when the printing plate started wearing out. So once a plate couldn't be used to print, they revised the book. And that started with number 35, The Haunted Showboat. And then finally, at the end of that trial where we found out who Carolyn Keane really was, one other outcome of that is that Simon & Schuster it was able to continue the Nancy Drew series. And they did that with volume 57. So they picked up right after the original, but they made them paperback. Now there are a few hardbacks that are, collectors type things or book club editions, but pretty much from number 57 to 175, it was in paperback. And then Nancy Drew just kept going on. So starting in 1994, we have the Nancy Drew files, the case files. Nancy Drew finally gets to go to college in Nancy Drew on Campus. And then there was a little spin-off series. And then in 2004, they came out with a new series called Nancy Drew Girl Detective. It was much more modern. There were 56 volumes, which I can't help but think was a nod to the original series. These books were told in the first person, and Nancy had a cell phone and a hybrid car. And there's even more Nancy. The Nancy Drew Diary started in 2013, and there are publishing dates all through this year. There were also books about a young Nancy, maybe third grade, the Nancy Drew notebooks, Nancy Drew and the Clue Crew, and a current series called Nancy Drew Clue Book that, again, is started in 2015 and still has publishing dates through this year. It's a very popular series. Nancy Drew also had graphic novels, and she finally has comic books starting in 2017. And this is with the Hardy Boys. Then she has her own comic series. And then she's back with the Hardy Boys in 2020 for the Death of Nancy Drew, which for her 90th anniversary, people thought was a little strange, but it was out there. So now we have another trivia question. In the original series, the first 56 books, where was the closest place to Royersford, PA that Nancy Drew solved the case?
This should be interesting because a lot of people that have been tuning into our calls are not necessarily from Royersford.
That's true. That's true. And yeah, and I forgot to mention, I'm actually from right outside of Pittsburgh, PA.
All right, we've got a pretty good turnout right here. I'll just do a couple more seconds. All right, looks like our best guess is Lancaster.
You are all killing it tonight because you are correct, Lancaster, PA. And that's actually where I attended my first Nancy Drew convention. A very close second is New York, New York. There are a couple books here that are based in New York. And this isn't a poll question, but just a quick bonus trivia. Do you know who Nancy always visited in New York City? That would be Aunt Eloise, the sister of Carson Drew. So people often ask me when they find out that I collect Nancy Drew books, they will say, do you have all of the Nancy Drew books? That's an interesting question because there are over 590 different stories and close to 2,800 printings of just the original series. So no, I do not have them all. I have at least one copy of every book in the original series and a lot more. And we'll kind of go through some of the different formats and things and collectibles. So I had this at the beginning of the talk. This is a little different picture than the one I have, but Farrah's Guide is considered the Nancy Drew Bible. He basically took apart all close to 2,800 printings of the original series and put them into different formats to help people understand what books they have. I'm not, to be honest with you, I'm not sure where to find this anymore. My husband got a copy for me on eBay. You might find it on eBay or Abe Books. I don't think he's printing this anymore. Now, some of the ways that he identified the formats was first by the dust jacket. So we all know what a dust jacket is. It's the cover on a hardback book, and they were used in the Nancy Drew series for the first 38 volumes. So here's a picture of actually the book that I had up. This is a picture of my own book. This is the dust jacket and then the book underneath. And that has a white spine to it. And then here's another picture. You'll see that the board of the book for this type of dust jacket, collectors will call the blue tweeds because the board looks like blue tweed. Now, inside the book is a different way to identify it. So we have the end papers, which are the inside covers of the books. And for the original series, there were 10 different end papers. And we were talking earlier, the very first Nancy Drews did not have pictures. So that's how you know that you have, an older or a first edition. There were no pictures. But here we have some examples of the silhouette end papers and what are called the digger end papers, where Nancy is watching someone either dig up evidence or dig to hide evidence. We're not sure. And then the other part of the book is called the frontispiece, which are pictures or picture at the front of the book facing the book title. Now, early books had glossy frontispieces. Very early editions had 3 pictures, and later just 1. And then after that, it was on plain paper. And then after the dust jackets, they moved to yellow spine books. So they could have different pictures on the covers, and they could also have different back covers. And these again are everything that David Farah put into his guide. So this is again one of some of my books. This is the Bungalow Mystery, and you'll see this cover, and it has 3 different backs to it. And there are also different picture covers on the front. Now, of course, the yellow spines had their own end papers, and there are some examples here. Now, the original series is still being printed today by Grosset and Dunlap, and they're called the flashlights because they have the flashlights, or some will call them glossies because the boards are glossy. And then there were also book club editions. So you'll see on the left was just the one with the border around it. There were only 3. They did the first 3. In the center are the cameos, and you'll see the front is the end papers have a cameo and different pictures. And then on the right, those book club editions did not have numbers on them. And there is nothing more frustrating as a collector to find those and find that somebody wrote the number in. We want to find them without the number. That's what makes them special. Here are some more book club editions. The ones on the left are called the Twin Thrillers because they have 2 books in one. And on the right were the book club for girls, and they were some of the Nancy Drew Files books. And then we have some library editions. And these were done on really heavy boards because they were checked out a lot. And there's a lot of different variations of library editions. And we were talking a little bit about book values. And oddly enough, during the pandemic, the value of library editions, what people were paying for them, shot up tremendously during the pandemic. One interesting note, the second one from the left where it says the clue in the crossword cipher, I'm sure many of you Nancy Drew fans recognize that artwork as the sign of the twisted candles. That artwork was used on every single title for that library series. I'm not sure why, but they didn't change the artwork. That was the only thing that they used. And this is a very rare edition of a library book from the 1930s of The Hidden Staircase. And then of course there are special books. Nancy Drew has to have a cookbook because as we know, I think in the clue of the diary, it's about 13 different times that they reference things that Hannah made or they stopped to eat. Some of the recipes include the mysterious mannequin casserole, which does not sound very appetizing, but thankfully there is Secret of the Old Clock ice cream pie, which sounds much better. And then there were some Nancy Drew puzzle books and sleuth books. And then collectors also look for Nancy Drew ads on the backs of other books. So this is the back of a Dana Girls book, but it's advertising the Nancy Drew books. So who drew Nancy Drew? So we talked about Russell Tandy before. Bill Gillies did some of the covers in the 1950s. Rudy Nappy did them after that, and those are actually some of my favorite covers. And then Polly Bolian created the cameo editions that we took a look at earlier. And then moving into the paperbacks, Ruth Sanderson did those, and she actually has a coloring book out on Amazon that you can order that has all of her covers. Erin McGuire does the Nancy Drew Diaries, and they just re-released the new Nancy Drew Files, and Fernanda Suarez does those covers. All right, now Nancy Drew has not just been in books. Nancy Drew has been on the screen. When was the first Nancy Drew movie released?
So interesting to watch the numbers come in.
Yep. No, I love it.
% here. Just a couple more seconds. All right. Let's see. Was it 38 or 77?
I don't know. Let's find out. 1938. That was starring Benita Granville. And then they released 3 more movies the following year. Now, all of the dates that I had listed were important for other reasons. In 2007, there was a Nancy Drew movie starring Emma Roberts, and Jennifer Fisher, who I mentioned runs the Nancy Drew Sleuths. She was a consultant for the movie, And at the very beginning, they show this massive collection of Nancy Drew books, and that's hers. So if you ever watch the movie, that's her collection. 2019 was also a significant date. Sophia Lillis appeared in Nancy Drew and the Hidden Staircase. It had a very limited theater release, but it was, I thought it was a very well done movie. Linda Lavin was in it. It was very well done. And Ellen DeGeneres was one of the producers. Now, one of my favorite things was the Hardy Boys Nancy Drew Mystery Series on TV, and that debuted in 1977. So that went between the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew, and sometimes they were together. And Harriet Adams, again, very involved in the Nancy Drew. She was reviewing the scripts and had some level of script approval at that point. This is one of the conventions I attended and was able to meet Pamela Sue Martin and Parker Stevenson, who were Nancy Drew and Frank Hardy. Sean Cassidy does not attend these. The producers were there as well. And one thing that was very interesting that they shared with us is that the Nancy Drew part of it started to decline a little bit because a lot of the girls were very interested in the Hardy Boys. So they watched that a lot. So that's why they started bringing them together. But ultimately, the Nancy Drew part only lasted for 2 years, and there were 3 years of the Hardy Boys series. And I just put this, I found these TV guide ads that I thought were interesting. You can see some of the guest stars that they had on the show. Now, of course, seeing them together on TV, there has to be more books. So we had 3 different series of the Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys together in books. And this is interesting. Here's a good poll question for you. Who else auditioned for the role of Nancy Drew?
You picked a good selection. Any one of them.
Yeah. And I actually thought of somebody else today, and I'll say it after we're done.
All right, we'll do about 5 more seconds. All right, looks like our best guess is Valerie Bertinelli.
All right, let's see. It was Jamie Lee Curtis. Now, she was obviously not cast, but she was in an episode of Nancy Drew. Valerie Bertinelli and Melanie Griffith were also in Hardy Boys episodes. And I didn't think of it, but Maureen McCormick, who played Marcia on the Brady Bunch, she was in an episode of Nancy Drew. She could have been a good person to audition. Now, this is not a polling question, but just a quick question of, can you name this TV Ned Nickerson? Yes, that is rocker Rick Springfield. He was Ned Nickerson for 1 episode. Nancy Drew is still on TV in 1995. There's a Canadian version starring Tracy Ryan. These were filmed in Toronto, and they were a little bit older. There was a Hardy Boys as well. And in 2002, The Wonderful World of Disney had a Nancy Drew TV movie that never really made it into a TV show, but it starred Maggie Lawson. And then in 2019, we have Nancy Drew premiering on the CW. It stars Kennedy McMahon, who was a Nancy Drew fan growing up. And being from Pittsburgh, I was excited to learn that she graduated from CMU. Now, it's set in the town of Horseshoe Bay, not River Heights, because the CW already has Riverdale, so they thought that would be too close. And the producers of the show put a very supernatural element to it. And from some of the interviews I've seen with them, it was because, well, you know, the ghost on the haunted bridge turned out to be an old scarecrow, but what if it really was a ghost? So let's put a supernatural element into it. Season 2 started in January, and it was renewed for season 3. And I have to share that Matt McMahon, who is Kennedy McMahon's dad, he posts all the Facebook pages. He's so proud of his daughter. It's really very sweet, but that's how we've learned about a lot of these things. And the series has a lot of Easter eggs, and by that I mean little things for people to hunt for. So here's a scene, for example, they're in the library and someone's carrying the yellow books. There's a character named Harriet Grossett. The kids go to Keane High School. Larkspur Lane, Lilac Inn are referenced, as well as Moonstone Island and Redgate Farm. There's a character named Laura Tandy in reference to Russell Tandy. And then there's a place called Stradamire Woods. Now, the name Harriet Grosset is very interesting because it's a nod to Harriet Strattomire Adams, Grosset and Dunlap, but there's one more connection. The character was played by, wait for it, Pamela Sue Martin. So that was an interesting little twist on the show. Now, I found this incredible graphic in the Spokesman review. It was put together by Charles Apple. This covers everything that we've talked about, every book, TV show, and movie of Nancy Drew. But that's not all. Nancy Drew also had games. So there were board games in the 50s. A 16-year-old at the time, Quincy McShane, she had a Kickstarter campaign. She started her own Nancy Drew board game. Jennifer Fisher recently released a Nancy Drew collector card game. And Her Interactive has been creating Nancy Drew video games for a long time. There are 34 of them. The last one was released in 2019, and they also did some games for younger children. And some of these games have some Easter eggs in the TV series. A character on the show named Rita Howe is a character in the Nancy Drew video game. And then I thought this one was extremely interesting. So if you've never seen the show, Nancy, George, and Bess all work at a restaurant called The Claw, and their uniforms are a nod to the colors of the game pieces, and the color of the claw is red. So it was red, yellow, green, and blue for the game pieces. All right, time for number 7 trivia. Nancy's not just popular in the United States. How many languages have the stories been translated into?
They're pretty decisive on this one.
Yes.
Quick. All right, we're almost at 90% here. Let's do a couple more seconds. All right, how'd we do? Is it 58?
Let's see. It is 26. If you are at all interested in any of the foreign editions, there is a website called nancydrewworld.com, maintained by another member of the Sleuths group, Leah Fox. She has cataloged every foreign edition of Nancy Drew. It's an absolutely amazing website. Now, Nancy's not Nancy all over the world. In Germany, her name is Suzanne, and she's a law student. In Sweden, she is Kitty, and in France, she is Alice. And here are just some examples of some foreign editions of Nancy Drew books. And these are not in a different language, but the one on the left is Armada Publishing, and that's Australia. And the two on the right are published by Collins in the UK. Now, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about Nancy Drew, Girl Sleuth, Nancy Drew and the Women Who Created Her by Melanie Rayhawk is one of my all-time favorite books, not just because it's about Nancy Drew, but she really talks about Mildred Wirt Benson, Harriet Stratamire Adams, their relationship, but also what it was like for them to be trailblazers in their careers in the 30s, with Mildred Wirt Benson being a journalist, Harriet Adams running a publishing business. It's a very, very well-written book. Missing Millie Benson is a little bit more of a children's book by Julie Rubini, but there's a lot of great information about Mildred Wirt Benson. And if you need a fun summer read, I cannot recommend enough Confessions of a Teen Sleuth. It's a parody not only of Nancy Drew, but of series books in general, and it's just a really fun read. And then Clues for Real Life was written by Jennifer Fisher. I've mentioned her many, many times in this presentation. She is the most consulted Nancy Drew expert in the world, honestly. There was actually a CBS Sunday Morning story about the 90th anniversary of Nancy Drew, and she was interviewed for that. She is currently writing a biography of Mildred Wirt Benson, and this is a great little book that she put out. I've mentioned the conventions. We did have one scheduled for Toledo again because Jennifer Fisher donated about 95% of her collection to the Toledo Library, and we were supposed to go for a dedication that was obviously canceled. And then for the conventions for this year, October 2021 will be online. Not a lot of details about that yet, but then in 2022 back in Salem. Just a real quick thing about the conventions, they're not all, sitting in a room, listening about Nancy Drew all the time or other things. Jennifer makes sure that, when we were in San Diego, we went to the zoo, we did, boat ride. She puts together little mystery things. She makes it a lot of fun, and it's a great way to see other parts of the country. And everywhere that the conventions are either relate to an author, the publishing house, or is somewhere that a Nancy Drew story took place. Now, Nancy Drew has a lot of accomplished women as fans as well. So I found this 60 Minutes interview with Sonia Sotomayor that I thought was great. So she wanted to be a cop, but unfortunately, at the age of 8, she found out, or maybe not unfortunately, she found out that she had diabetes and that being a cop would have been too physically demanding. But the interviewer, Scott Pelley, said, "So we are sitting in the Supreme Court today because you read Nancy Drew and watched Perry Mason." And she said, "That's exactly right." And one of her first jobs, she bought herself a convertible. Another very accomplished woman inspired by Nancy Drew was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She said, "In my growing up years, I can't say I had a role model of a woman in law because women were barely there. She was the trailblazer. But I did have 2 inspirations, real and fictional. The first was Amelia Earhart, and a fictional character was Nancy Drew." And if you want to read a little bit more, Mary Jo Murphy has a great article in the New York Times called "Nancy Drew and the Secret of the 3 Black Robes." So what can we learn from Nancy? Well, we want to know how to creatively signal for help. If you're ever trapped, in an airplane and you're kidnapped, make sure you have your lipstick handy so you can write backwards on the plane outside so people can see you. Make sure you remember your Morse code so that you can use your tap dancing skills to signal for help. You always want to be a good friend. This I found very interesting about Nancy. If you remember the original books, Nancy never has a boyfriend. Nancy has a date. And that was a very important distinction that the book publishers wanted to make, the syndicate wanted to make, because they had a series that Ruth Fielding where she got married and sales plummeted. So they made sure that Nancy just dated people. And dating always came second to sleuthing. As she says, "Don't let him think you can always easily arrange your sleuthing around his social calendar." And of course, dessert is important. Chocolate cake is a great pick-me-up when dealing with a strange case. But of course, I think some of the most important things we learned from Nancy is to help others, to persevere, to ask questions, and always try to do the right thing. So my niece asked me one time, "Is Nancy Drew real?" And it reminded me of a question that a young girl asked before about if Santa Claus was real. So I decided to answer my niece in the very same way. I said, "Yes, Virginia, there is a Nancy Drew. She exists as certainly as mystery, adventure, and exotic vacations exist. And you know that they abound and give your life its highest sense of thrills and excitement. Alas, how dreary would the world be if there were no Nancy Drew? It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginias. There would be no luncheons, no chums, no looking becoming in the latest fashions, no nefarious characters to capture, no roadsters, no rewards for solving the case to make tolerable this existence. The eternal light of flashlights under their covers just to read one more chapter would be extinguished. She lives and she lives forever. She will continue to inspire others to be independent, strong, determined individuals with a great purpose to help others." So we all have different reasons for loving this teenage sleuth. Her positive qualities and incredible spirit have endured for 91 years, and she shows no signs of slowing down. So I thank you so much for sleuthing with me this evening.
Thank you, Tara. That was so fun.
You.
Yay, I see more claps coming through.
Aw.
Any questions yet, but I'm sure you've got some questions or comments in there. If you want to speak, use that raise hand button. You can find that depending on what version of Zoom you have, either under the participants tab or maybe under the reactions. Or you can put your questions in the chat. I think we had a very seasoned group. They knew almost all of those poll questions.
Yes, they did.
I
Yes,
was
they did.
impressed.
That was very impressive.
Uh-huh. I'm getting a couple thank yous on my end. Great presentation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight. I appreciate it.
Really enjoyed it. Lots of fun. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, here we go. Do you have a favorite out of all the books? What's your favorite mystery?
My favorite is the Bungalow Mystery.
Mm,
Number 3. Yep.
yeah. Bringing back great memories. So much fun. Let's see. Evelyn looks like she's struggling to find her hand. Let me let you unmute yourself again. All right, go ahead, Evelyn.
I had the cookbook.
Yes.
Yeah, and I remember making some dinners for my mom on Saturdays so she could have a break. There was some sort of
Aw.
mysterious pork chop
Yeah.
thing that I made. And then I don't remember if this was a suggestion in the book or my own creativity, but I thought that the cottage cheese would be great with like some green food coloring, and then nobody would eat that. And I think that was maybe the end of my Nancy Drew cookbook cooking.
I'm sorry to hear that.
But
That's
I think the pork chop, the mysterious pork chop recipe kind of caught on though.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's a great memory to share.
Someone wants to know if you think Pamela Sue Martin regretted her decision to stop acting in the series.
I actually don't think so. She was very pleasant and very cordial, but as I said, the Hardy Boys were becoming more popular, and they were getting more of the show than she really was, or she had to be with them. And she doesn't seem to be like super excited to be there. If that sounds, like I said, she was super sweet and very nice, but like Parker Stevenson was so excited to talk to everybody. She seemed to really enjoy seeing him, and it seemed like they enjoyed working together, but I actually don't think she did. Although I thought she was a fantastic Nancy Drew. I still watch that series from 1977.
Why is book 3, The Bungalow, one your favorite?
It just has all of the elements, of a classic Nancy Drew. Even though Bess and George aren't in it, there's a sea squall. And of course, as my husband will always tease me, Carson Drew's working his fingers to the bone so that Nancy can go, working or, go on vacation somewhere. Her convertible's in it a lot, and she helps Laura Pendleton regain her inheritance. And I just thought it was really nice how she helped her. So it just, I don't know, it just has all the classic elements of a Nancy Drew book.
Great. Let's see. Why weren't the various authors more consistent on basic facts like hair color or characters?
That's actually a very good question, and I'll be honest, I don't know the answer, but you're right. Nancy was blonde. Sometimes she was Tahitian. Sometimes she was, whatever. I will say that, Harriet Strattomire Adams and Mildred Wirt Benson kind of were always at odds about, like Nancy didn't kiss anybody until much, much later. I think Mildred Wirt Benson was always trying to make her more independent, and Mildred or Harriet Stradmire Adams was trying to pull her back. But that, I really don't know why some of those, basic things weren't more consistent.
How do you think Nancy Drew impacted your life personally?
Personally, I feel like she made me question things all the time. I wanted to be a journalist. I like asking questions. My current profession as a business analyst, I'm constantly asking questions, constantly trying to make things better, and just always trying to help people is something that I learned from the series.
Mm-hmm. Kathy says, loved it. I have my mother's books from the 30s and my own from the 60s. I was inspired by Nancy Drew and became a law enforcement officer for 37 years. Will love Nancy forever.
Aw, and thank you for your service. That's fantastic. That's wonderful.
Susan says, thank you. That was fun. So many memories of the girl detective who started my lifelong love of mysteries. Let's see, has there been any interest in someone writing a spin-off series for Bess or George?
Very interesting. I'm not aware of anything. I will say, and I'm not going to get into a debate on the TV show. There's people who hate the new TV show, people who love it, and kind of everywhere in between. But I think at least on the new TV show, kind of the backstories of their lives are more in focus than, in the books, they're just always kind of, the cousins helping Nancy. But I don't know if there will ever be a spin-off of them.
Going back to one of those previous questions, William Land says that Mildred and Harriet had very different ideas of who Nancy should be.
Yep.
Nancy was brash and caustic at times, while Adams's Nancy was more ladylike.
Absolutely. William is 100% correct. And if you read Melanie Rayhawk's book that gets into that a lot, is kind of the Harriet Strattomire. Adams graduated from Wellesley, and everything was she wanted to be a Wellesley girl. And we heard that Mildred Ward Benson was kind of more tomboyish, and William's right. She was more brash. If you read the original text of some of the books, and kind of the way, if you think about 1930s, Nancy's mom passed away. She's running the household, and you read some of the books, and I couldn't imagine myself talking to my parents in some of the ways. So he's absolutely right. That's Mildred Wirt Benson wanted her to be even more brash, more independent than Harriet.
Mm-hmm. How do you go about joining the Sleuths group?
So let me go back here. Oops. Go to the website. So you can go to Nancy Drew Fans, and there is an email there. I think that I can't even remember what I paid. There's also ndsleuths.com or nancydrewfans.com. And there should be some information on there about how to join the sleuths. I think it's like $10 for life, or please don't quote me on that. I can't remember. I paid my dues a very long time ago. And I don't think you have to be a member of the sleuths to go to the conventions if you're interested in them. But like I said, Jennifer Fisher always does a wonderful job with everything that she does with the convention. So
great. Looks like one of my fellow librarians is here. The children's librarian from Conshohocken says she has a 1,000-piece puzzle from Cobble Hill with all 56 book covers. So thanks, Lorraine, for coming out.
I have that in a box that I'll never put together.
Go ahead, you can unmute yourself if you like. If it'll let you. There you go.
And so it's been in my closet as well for about 10 years. But I just discovered tonight, I can still see the print on this book. Mm-hmm. This is the first one. So as a child, I always wanted to read The Hidden Staircase. We have a hidden staircase up to our attic.
Oh, nice.
And my dad would never put a light there. He said the light's in the living room. However, the house is in my name now. I can still read the print. There will be a light in there.
Yeah. That's awesome.
This was wonderful, Tara and Kelly. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Let's see. Someone wants to know if there's a Nancy Drew Barbie or any kind of dolls.
There were dolls. There were Madame Alexander dolls, and they were only out for a couple years. They're very rare. And then Kenner did some Nancy Drew dolls for the 2007 Emma Roberts movie. I believe it was Kenner, but not Barbie. But there were a few dolls. The Hardy Boys had their own dolls. Yeah, the Madame Alexander, those are extremely, extremely rare to find.
See, William has another fun tidbit here. He says both versions of Old Clock are basically the same plot, but Nancy is a different character in both. In the original, Nancy wants the Tophams to disinherit because they're snobbish and rude, but in the revision, Nancy wants the other heirs to inherit because they are needy and she wants to be kind. She is sorry for the Tophams in this book, but is glad to right a wrong. The deserving people get the money.
That's a
example of how they were revised and updated.
Mm-hmm. That's a great thing to share. Thank you, William.
Mm-hmm. And I'm still rolling in plenty of this was great thank yous, wonderful presentation, Tara. Yeah, they just keep coming. So yeah, I think everyone really, really enjoyed it. That is the end of my questions thus far. So I am going to allow you guys to unmute yourselves now. Go ahead, Evelyn. Looks like you've got something to say.
Well, it was a question, and I'm guessing the answer maybe is no, but you had shown a picture that was a more recent printing of all of the original series books. And I was wondering if they were still the updated versions or if they actually reprinted them as they were originally written without changing the plots and updating the old language.
So the ones that are printed now, the glossies or the flashlights, those are the revised text. There was a company called Applewood, and they republished the original text so that you did not have to spend, $60, $75 to reread the original text. And they have some introductions with them. They have the frontispieces and they have the original covers. They stopped printing those. So I've bless you. I've seen some of the Applewood books on eBay also going for around $50. I know that our library has several Applewoods. So if you did want to read the original text, I would check the library to see if they have them or can get them. But the ones that are printed, the glossies, flashlights, those are the revised text.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Check that when I go in tomorrow. For those of you that came in late, there is a recording of this program. I'll be sending that out tonight as an email, but you can also find it on our regular YouTube page. There's links on our website and Facebook, so you'll have plenty of access to that later on this evening. All right, if we don't have any more questions or comments, I'm going to make this last call. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for coming out. And Tara, again, thank you so much. You're obviously so knowledgeable about all of this, and you made the whole thing very interesting and upbeat. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to everybody for sharing your memories and your stories. It's just always fun to connect with Nancy Drew fans. So have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Lots of
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.